Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Beckham. One of the first things I tried in Photoshop many years ago were the filters. But did you know that the filters we see now were not part of the original Photoshop? The filters back then were an optional extra that you had to pay for, and I seem to recall that they came on a stack of floppy disks. Remember those? One of the things I've noticed as the resolution of cameras have increased over the years is that the filters seem to work slightly better on images around 150 pixels per inch. Our modern images from say 20 to 30 megapixel cameras seem to have just a little too much resolution sometimes for the filters to work quite so well. So something like 150 pixels per inch does seem to give good results on screen. But it is going to depend quite a bit on your personal choices and of course on the size of the image you're looking to create. Now what I have open in Photoshop here is an old picture that I shot way back before I was even shooting raw images. It was a historical event in the UK, and I believe these soldiers are from the American Colonial Wars era. Now the resolution was around about 150 pixels per inch and the overall width is around 24 inches. Now I found this filter technique is quite forgiving and it will work quite well on many different subjects, but images packed with fine detail, generally, they won't work quite as well as a bolder subject. And those you're looking at here in Photoshop's bridge, they'd all work pretty well with what we're about to demonstrate. Now I'd like to convert this JPEG image into a smart object before I open up Adobe Camera Raw to make some initial edits. Now I use the F4 key to do this for me instantly, and if you look across at the top right you'll see that the little symbol at the bottom right of that thumbnail tells us that this image is now a smart object, and I can remove it easily with another function key which I've just applied, F2. So F4 will create a smart object or a smart filter for me. Now it's very easy to set up keys like this, and I use them all the time, and they're of more benefit than we sometimes appreciate. To set up that F4 key, if we go to the top left of the screen, go to Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts, we need to know where the command is situated. Well, we're talking about layers here. So if we go to the layers and open them up, we do have to scroll down quite a long way, but we will find the opportunity here to create a smart object. I'm going to use my page down key here, and I think I need to hit it about 8 times. Let's see if I've got my count right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There it is, right down on the bottom line. So when we get to the options for smart objects, let me come down a little more. There you'll see convert to a smart object. I've got the F4 key set. Now when you open up this you're going to see a different key there, but we can click that key and we can choose one, and as you see I chose F4. Before I go to accept it, or just as I accept it, Photoshop will always tell you if the key is being used elsewhere, and in this case F4 is being used, but it's being used for something quite obscure, so I'm quite happy to bypass that and accept it as a quick way to convert to a smart object. And if you go further down this same list, you'll find there's a command to rasterize, and I've applied that to the F2 key. Pretty convenient. So with my JPEG converted into a smart object, I'm going to make use of the Adobe Camera Raw controls, but with a JPEG we do that via our filters menu. So we need to go to Filter and Camera Raw Filter. Now the changes we're going to make here, they're not cast in stone because we're going to filter the image, so we're not entirely sure what editing we need. So all I would say at this stage is it's our best guess. Now this image doesn't really need a great deal of adjustment, I think. If I go down to my clarity, I'm going to lift that a little bit. I'll lift the vibrance a little bit. I may put a graduated filter on the base just to darken that down a little bit. Click and drag up. And I'll drop the exposure there. And maybe even a bit of a saturation as well. I don't think the top needs a great deal. We've got quite a large white, looks like a top of a tent on the right hand side. I think I'll use an adjustment brush to see if I can do something about that. So selecting that adjustment brush, I'll make my image a little bit bigger. And I'm going to drop down the exposure there and also the highlights. The flow is set to 5, so it's going to be quite gradual. That's all I want to do, is do a little bit of work on that just to take away the worst of the glow of that white. While I've got this tool selected, there's a little bit up here, and I could actually do a little bit of work there. We don't have to be overly fussy with this because of the nature of the filtration we're going to be giving this. But if I hit the Z key to bring my zoom back, and I'll right click and fit this on screen, I think for the moment that's all I really need. So I'm going to click OK and open this back up into Photoshop. So looking at the thumbnails in the Layers palette, we can see the flexibility that a smart object gives us. I can double click the words Camera Raw filter and the image will open up where we were a few moments ago. And I can make any changes to the changes I've already made, and then I can add those changes or remove whatever I want. And I can do that now without any worry about losing quality. On top of that, I do have a mask, so I could use the mask to reduce the impact of the filter that I've just applied. We do have some blend options here, but we don't need those for the moment. What I do need is a couple of more copies of this layer once I've done the work in Adobe Camera Raw. So what I'm going to do here is hit Ctrl J and Ctrl J again. But I actually don't need all of this for what I need these two layers for. So this is where that F2 key is going to come in. Touch the F2 key and I've just rasterized that layer, and I'll do the same with that one. And for the moment, I'm going to turn those two off, reselect my original layer, because what we're going to do now is add a couple of filter effects. So let's go to the filters menu. I'm going to choose Artistic and Plastic Wrap. Let's move the image up so we can see it. Now the settings we're going to use here, they're very variable. We're all going to choose something else, and when you try this for the first time, if you just use the default settings, you probably won't go too far wrong. But you'll notice in a moment when we see this opened up into Photoshop how much flexibility we've got because we're working on a smart object. But I actually want to add another filter effect on top of the plastic wrap. To do that, I'm going to go down to the little plus at the bottom of this palette. And for this one, I'm going to go up and choose Cutout. Now we do get some choices here. We can increase the number of levels. So you can see what that does. Again, it's not cast in stone and it's not hugely significant. We're all going to choose something different. And to be honest, most of the time, most of the settings work quite well. So I'm going to click OK and we'll open this up into Photoshop. So if you look at the bottom of that little layers group there, not only can we double click and go back into Camera Raw to make adjustments to the basic changes we made right at the start, but we also get the opportunity via the filter gallery option here to double click, go straight back into the filters and either adjust the ones that we've applied or even apply others. But let's move on with one of those other layers. What you'll notice when we go through that filter effect is it does take away quite a lot of the colour of the image. So that's why I had two other layers, and one of these is just to put back some colour. So if I turn that layer back on and go to select it first and then go to the blend modes, I just need to select colour. And as you can see, all that's doing is keeping the filter effect, but it's putting back some nice colour there. Now the top layer, all we need that for is to just temper the effect of the other two. All these things are going to be purely personal. Let's turn this on, select it, and I'll drop the opacity down to 0. Now we can just bring this up until we get to a point where we feel we've got quite a nice effect. Now I've just taken the opportunity to save the work so far as a Photoshop file because of course it will save all three of those layers and my mask and my ability to go back into my filters even if I open this image up tomorrow. So we've got some options here. If we don't feel we've applied the filters heavy enough, we can double click the filter gallery. That'll take us straight back into the place we was working a few moments ago. We can select either the plastic wrap or the cutout, and we can turn each of them off so we can go back and look and make changes to the plastic wrap if it needs it, either improving the filter effect or maybe backing away a little bit, all personal. When we're happy with that, of course, all we would need to do is click OK and those changes would be applied. We also have the opportunity to change the base image. So even now, if we felt it needed more or less colour, then we could affect that by jumping back into Camera Raw. We've got a huge amount of flexibility here. Now to continue with the work I want to do on this image, I would want to combine all of those layers into one because any changes I want to affect all three layers. But I don't want to lose the flexibility I have here. So if I select the top layer in my stack here, I'm going to hold my Alt key, go to the top right of the layers, click, and I'm going to select Merge Visible. Now what Photoshop has just done is taken all three of those layers and combined them into one. So if I hit Ctrl S, I've now just saved over the top of my previously saved file. So now I've got my layered version, but I've also got my flattened version or my merged version, so I can proceed with any changes I feel it needs. Now one of the options open to me is to touch that F4 key to recreate a smart object. Go to the filters menu and open up Camera Raw filter. I'm going to click and drag to zoom in a little bit. I've just noticed that this guy, and this guy, maybe a little bit of this one, but they don't seem to have quite so dark a tunics as some of the others. So I wonder if I can just do something about that with an adjustment brush. So if I select my adjustment brush and drop the exposure a bit, maybe the blacks a bit, and just drop the brush down, looking at my flow over on the right hand side, it's quite low at 5%, I assume that's percent, but you can see I can just darken down the tunics here. It's not very difficult to do or time consuming, as you can see. Only takes just a few seconds. That's all I really wanted to do, just bring them down a little bit. Maybe this guy's hat. I don't want to darken their faces anymore. But if I touch the Z key, I can then right click and fit the image. And I think all I really want to do here is to just do final small tweaks. Let me just have a look at just lifting the exposure a little bit. Just a touch. Don't think I need anything else there, but maybe a vignette. So I'm going to pick up my circular filter. I'll double click in the center. There's the bounding box. As you know, we can adjust this any way we see fit, and we can rotate it as well. But for what I want, I think it's going to be doing its job if it's just around the edge like that. I'm going to touch the V key and we can hide it, and I'm going to bring down the exposure just to focus attention. In fact, I think I will bring it back. I'll touch the V key. I may bring it out a little bit, let it spread outside the picture surface, so I'm making my vignette a little bit further out. I'll touch the V key again, double click exposure to reset it, so I can re-evaluate what I'm doing. You get the idea. I'm going to click OK once I'm happy with what I've done. Now I've just taken the opportunity to save my layered file once again, but I have given it a different name. So I've got the best of all worlds, but I've done that because I think I'm ready now to go to the top right of the layers and choose to flatten the image. Now there's just a couple of things I'd like to do. We've got a little bit of the bright sky showing through the leaves there. Well, that's a pretty easy fix with the spot healing brush. Now I've gone ahead and done that work because it is pretty simple to do. The final thing may be nice is a texture, because whenever we're going to filter an image and move away from photo quality into a more artistic look, sometimes a texture filter just finishes the job. Well, here's an idea. I'm going to go to my layers menu at the top left. I'm going to select new layer. From the options here, I'm going to select the mode as overlay, and I'm going to tick the box to fill this overlay with a neutral colour. In this case, as it tells us, it's 50% grey, because what we can do is create our texture on an isolated layer. But here's another great use for that F4 key that I was talking about earlier on, because if I touch that and set this up as a smart object or a smart filter, when I add a texture here, I've got infinite control to be able to change that a number of different times, and that's pretty useful, especially if we're trying a number of different textures to see which one works best. Now I'm going to add something quick and simple here, so let's go to our filters menu, go down to texture and texturizer. I'm going to use the burlap filter here. I've got it set at a high scale of 200% and a relief of about 5. We're all going to choose something very slightly different. You can go to this little icon here and you can load textures, because you can locate textures on the internet which are different to those that come with Photoshop. So a little bit of experimentation perhaps. All I'm going to do here is apply this with the OK. Now I'll just bring my picture up a little bit on screen so you can see it a little bit easier. There you can see the weave over on the right hand side. Now here's the great thing about using a smart filter. If I'm not happy with what I've just done here, I've changed my mind, I want a finer texture. Well, I can just double click the texturizer, I'm straight back in, and I could select canvas. There I've got canvas at 200%, click OK, and there I have the canvas texture. Not happy with that, it's too heavy on the faces, then I can double click and I can drop back the relief or the scale. But even better than that, if the texture was obliterating a face a little bit too much, then I can relieve the texture just on the face with the mask. If I select the mask, select black from my toolbox, a standard soft edge brush, I've got my flow rate set to 10%, and if I go to the man on the end here, if I wanted to remove the texture from his face, it's very quick and easy to do that. So here I'm showing the original JPEG, and we can take a look at that with the filter effect and the texture. After looking at this image for a little while, I think it probably is one of those that maybe the texture is a little too much and it could do with being removed. But working in layers as we have, That's very easy and quick to do. There are obvious other options we have: strategic colour, sepia tone and colour. But as I said earlier on, practically any subject that's fairly bold will work with this multi-filter technique. Here we're looking into a hot air balloon from the top, the envelope which is pulled when the balloon lands to let the hot air escape. So we're looking back here towards the basket, which you can see on its side. Another balloon shot, it wasn't even totally sharp, and yet it still works reasonably well, and there is a texture applied here. And finally, this one taken at the Beamish Centre in the north of England. It works pretty well, but I didn't think the texture worked too well because we've got quite a bit of detail in the top left. It seems to work pretty well just as it is. I'll see you next time.